We're continuing our series today, What Do You Really Believe? And so I want to ask you this morning, what do you really believe about heaven? What do you imagine that heaven is? And I've got a couple of microphone assistants here who are going to help me. We want to hear from you. So I invite our microphone runners to stand up now. And my question is, what do you think heaven is? When you imagine heaven, what is it that you imagine? So raise your hands and we're going to bring the microphones to you. Raise your hands.
I believe that heaven is all your family who have passed all come together and you become family again.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Raise your hands.
Heaven is being here with everyone.
Happiness right now.
Happiness right now.
I believe heaven is in our hearts.
In our hearts. I saw a hand over here.
Heaven is somewhat constructed like it is on earth for our comfort. So we're social beings, and even though we don't need to eat, we need the social connections. And so we have a virtual house. And the next day we can have a different virtual house. And it's our choice as to whether we stay on the same level that we enter or whether we keep taking lessons to go higher and higher.
Thank you. Thank you. Behind you.
I believe heaven is when we feel connected with the gratitude for our blessings that we have right here, right now.
Anyone else? Am I missing anybody? Here's one.
Peace.
Oh, we got another one.
How do we know this isn't heaven?
How do we know this isn't heaven? Right here and now? There we go. All right, well, let's explore that question. Let's acknowledge everybody who was willing to share. I would bet that there must be, close to 400 people here today, and there are probably 400 different images of what heaven is all about. And in our series, it's important to have an understanding of what you believe heaven is all about. Yesterday was St. Patrick's Day, and an Irish friend of mine told me a story that took place over in Ireland. And it seems that there was a particular Irish priest who was all inspired by the Spirit. And so he went into his local pub. He walks into the pub and he goes up to the first man that he sees and he says to him, "So, do you want to go to heaven?" And the man says, "Oh, yes, Father, I do." And so the priest says, "Great, well then just go stand over there against that wall." He goes up to the second man that he sees. "Sir, do you want to go to heaven?" And the man says, "Well, yes, Father, I do, very much." He says, "Then great, go stand against the wall over there." Then he comes up to his friend O'Toole. O'Toole's been in the bar for a while by now. And the priest says to O'Toole, "So, my friend O'Toole, do you want to go to heaven?" And O'Toole says, "No, Father, I do not." "You do not want to go to heaven when you die?" "Oh, when I die? Yes, I thought you were getting a group together to go right now." I'll give lessons on the Irish brogue later. Yeah, not very good ones, though. Not very good ones. Funny how my mind is digressing in this moment to the first time I tried an Irish brogue, which was in a dramatic competition when I was in high school, and I had to speak an Irish brogue, and nobody told me how. Well, not only did we not advance in the competition, their only criticism was of my Irish brogue. So I'm here to show them, right? So heaven, what is heaven? What is heaven for you? Well, first, in our series, we're exploring this opportunity for you to get clear on what you believe, on all these difficult concepts we've been talking about for the last several weeks. And today our message is, what do you really believe about heaven, hell, and what happens when you die? So let's start first with what Unity teaches about heaven and hell. And Unity teaches that heaven and hell are states of consciousness right here and now. And according to our co-founder, Charles Fillmore, he said, one does not need to die in order to go to hell, any more than one has to die to go to heaven. Both are states of mind and conditions which people experience as a direct outworking of their thoughts, beliefs, words, and acts. So heaven and hell, he says, are a direct outworking of what we're thinking, believing, and how we're acting. And James Dillett Freeman, who's another amazing Unity teacher and writer, put it this way. He said, heaven and hell are states in you and me. The gulf between them is no wider than a thought. I know people who spend every day in heaven and people who spend every day in hell. No wider than a thought. Now, do you believe that? Well, perhaps. If we explore this notion of heaven being a state of consciousness, then let's talk about what kind of consciousness it is. You see, heaven is about remembering your oneness with God. It's about remembering that you are love, you are pure love, you're nothing but pure love. Heaven is about remembering that you've never been separate from God. Even when you thought you were never separate from God. So heaven is about remembering. And if heaven is about remembering, then hell is about forgetting. Hell is about forgetting that you are one with God. It's that time when you feel separate. And the thing about heaven and hell that I've observed, these states of consciousness, is that they are not dictated so much by what is going on in our lives as by what we are feeling inside. I mean, haven't you known people, maybe you're one of them, who can go through life's challenges and still be in heaven? That doesn't mean it necessarily feels good, but if heaven is knowing your oneness with God, then surely it's possible to go through the, quote, hellish circumstances of life in heaven, knowing that God is there in you. We get all kinds of messages in the Bible about heaven, beautiful kingdom of heaven parables. One tells us that the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, that teeny tiny seed that as it grows into a great big shrub, so big that the birds of the air make their nests in it. So that says that heaven is a consciousness of creation and expansiveness, making it possible for birds and divine ideas to grow in you and as you. And there's another kingdom of heaven parable that says that the kingdom of heaven is like yeast that makes the bread to rise. That heaven consciousness, you see, really is a consciousness of expansion. There's a Greek word that is often translated as heaven, and it is the word oranos, which means expanding. Thus, when you are in a state of heaven consciousness, you're in an expansive consciousness. Everything is possible. The total expansiveness of God. And there is a Greek word Hades, which is sometimes translated as hell, and that means not able to see. And so when we're in a state of hell, we're literally not able to see God, not notice that God is there. We've forgotten God. So heaven consciousness is expansive. It's remembering our oneness. And hell consciousness is contracting. It's forgetting. So if you're comfortable, would you stand for just a moment? Just stand, and if it's not comfortable, you can stay seated. But I want you to imagine with me, just stretch your arms as far as you can. Watch where you're stretching, because there's people all around you. Stretch them up, down, just stretch. And no, there's no limits to how far you can stretch. Feel that expansiveness. Feel God in you, stretching. And then bring your arms in and hold them tight to you. And maybe look down and just feel constricted. And now expand your arms again. Expand, knowing there is no limit. You are in God consciousness. There is no limit. And when you're ready, have a seat. I hope nobody got slapped too hard. You see, heaven is that expansiveness where there's no limit. We can feel it in our bodies. We can feel it in our heart when we remember that we are one with God. And this is not to ever diminish the pain that we walk through. Sometimes people think that we'll never walk through pain, that we'll never walk through challenge, and that is not the truth. And yet we always do have a choice as to how we walk through it. So there's this asserting that heaven is a state of consciousness right here, right now. How do we know that this isn't heaven? We don't know that this isn't heaven. We don't know that. If you want a short answer from me, I've got to say I don't know exactly what heaven is. Now, some of you are really wanting to get to the good stuff because you heard that the talk was heaven, hell, and what happens when you die. And you want to know, okay, Patricia, what happens when you die? This is what I really want to know. And of course, would that I could tell you exactly what's going to happen when you die? I don't know. Sorry, you can go home now, I suppose, but we're going to explore because that's what this series is all about, right? We're going to explore. You'll get clearer on your questions when you leave today, even if you're not clearer on your answers. So, what I do love, though, is how Jesus speaks about it. He says, in my Father's house, there are many mansions. Sometimes he says, it's translated as, in my Father's house, there are many rooms. So it strikes me that it can be interpreted as saying there are many realms of existence. Right there, you might call them levels of existence or realms of existence or rooms of existence. So right now we are in the physical body. We are in the physical body realm. But when our bodies are laid down at the end of our lives, the soul goes on, and Unity teaches that the soul is eternal. Now, where does it go? Well, it goes into another room in God's house. It goes into another realm, if you will, another existence that we may not be able to see with our eyes, but is still there in some way. I want to say a little bit about near-death experiences because people who've had near-death experiences often come back with reports of them. And they're not as uncommon as you might think. In fact, if you're comfortable, I'd like to ask how many of you have ever yourself had a near-death experience? That's where you've been clinically perhaps declared dead or medically dead and come back to life. Or how many of you know someone? So how many of you either have had or know someone who's had a near-death experience? Raise your hand. Now, it's interesting if you look around. Not everybody wants to raise their hand really high, but there's a large number of people in this room here today. I'm guessing maybe 20% at least raised their hands. And there are many common threads to this story. Some say there's a bright light. Some say that there's this tremendous peace and comfort. I'll share with you that the closest that I've come to a near-death experience is my father-in-law. Years ago, when he was in his middle age of life, he was cutting his lawn with an electric lawnmower. Now, I personally have never seen an electric lawnmower, but he was cutting his lawn with one, and he reached down to grab the cord, and for whatever reason, when he reached down to grab that cord, it began to electrocute him. And it just so happens that my brother-in-law, my husband's brother, happened to see what was happening and was able to yank the cord out of the outlet. They got my father-in-law to the hospital, and when he got there, he was coughing up black stuff. I mean, literally, he was being electrocuted. And yet he obviously came back into physical form. And the way he described it was this profound sense of peace. This profound sense of peace. And he was a man who was known to be type A, who operated at a very high rev all the time. I mean, he was always moving in a fast pace, a stressful pace, and he felt this profound peace. One of the common characteristics that people describe of having been through a near-death experience is that they no longer fear death. They no longer fear death. Whatever they experience, whether it is profound peace, profound love, is so strong that they no longer fear laying their bodies down. I had the opportunity to visit with one of our church members, Stephanie Barton. Some of you know Stephanie. She and her family are longtime members here, very active and involved, and she has a special gift, Stephanie does. And her gift is that she's able to connect with people in another room of God's house. She's able to connect with people who you might say are in the afterlife, or they've moved on, or they've died. And so I had the opportunity to visit with her, and when I did, they were all there. My mom and dad, my mother and father-in-law, even our dogs. Even our dogs were there. And I had this wonderful conversation with my father. Dad was so excited to tell me, and all I can tell you, I can't quite describe the experience for you, but somehow Stephanie makes a connection. And my loved one spoke through her. And so there my dad was, so happy to tell me about the pear tree that was growing. You see, my dad always loved plants and trees. He was always trying to grow things, and sometimes they did and sometimes they didn't. So we had pear trees in our yard. They never bore fruit that I saw. But in wherever Dad is now, he said, "Look, everything grows, Patty." That's what he called me. Everything grows. Even the tomato plants, they grow. And then I asked him, "Well, what is it like?" And he used a metaphor that only my father would use. He used a metaphor of a tree. And he said, "So, if you're standing at the base of a tree, you can't really see very far." He said, "It's like if I was standing at a tree and you were in the backyard and you called me, I could see you. But if your brother was far away and he called me, I couldn't necessarily see him. But if I were up on the next limb of the tree, and you called me, I could see you, or your brother called me, I could see him. And if I go up high enough in the tree, I could see you even if you were in the backyard and he was in the front yard." He said, "But I'm just on the first limb." Interesting. And then he had to end our conversation because he had to go fishing. Which was perfect because he loved to fish. He did. And he and I had some very special times together. I would just kind of lay in the boat and he would fish. And that was our father-daughter time. It's comforting. It was comforting for me to have that experience. However it falls in your heart today, it was comforting for me to have that experience. It confirmed what I've always believed, that our loved ones' spirits don't disappear. They don't evaporate into nothingness. My personal belief and my knowing has been that they are very much in our midst. Don't know what level of the tree they're on. But you see, what Stephanie shares is that this is her experience. That people who have moved on each one may have a different experience of what heaven is like, or what that place is like. For Dad, it would be nature. Now, for some people, that would not sound like heaven at all, right? It might be something else. So we're invited into the question to wonder, what is the afterlife like? Now many believe in reincarnation. Unity doesn't take a particular stand on reincarnation. Reincarnation is where the body or the spirit comes back to live in more than one body. It comes back life after life. And different spiritual traditions teach that the spirit comes back into bodily form for different purposes. Unity doesn't take a position on that, although it's fairly clear from Fillmore's writings that he believed in that at some point. But the Fillmores also believed in what they call regeneration. They really believed that through our thinking and through our prayer work, that our bodies could live forever. And that was their firm belief. And that if you didn't, then you'd come back again and you'd get to keep trying to align your thinking in a particular way. That was one set of belief systems, but Unity today takes no particular stand on that. as it relates to reincarnation, Eric Butterworth, who wrote the book that we've been working in, Discover the Power Within You, he even tries to make a case that perhaps Jesus believed in reincarnation. You know, you can interpret some of the scriptures that way. It was a common teaching back in Jesus' day. And there was a particular interaction, you'll remember this, where Jesus is speaking to the disciples, and he says, "So who do the people say I am?" And the responses that the disciples give that are, one says, well, they say, "You're Elijah." Elijah was a great prophet. And someone else says, "Well, you're Jeremiah," who was also a great prophet. And Jesus doesn't rebuke them. He doesn't say, "Well, that's nonsense. How could you say such a thing?" He never says, he never buys into it, but he never disputes it either. So there was a common belief around about that particular time. Perhaps that's something that brings some people comfort, to believe in reincarnation, to think that the spirit will come back in another form. So what we're about today is exploring possibilities of heaven, hell, and what happens when you die. For myself, I intuitively feel right about the truth that heaven or hell are right here and right now. And now, you know, some traditions teach that you want to live a good life today so that when you do die, when you lay your body down, then you'll get to go to heaven. That doesn't ring true for me. But even if it did, I would say the key is right here, right now is what matters. This moment is what matters. And I want to do all that I can to remember God in this moment, so that when I'm feeling as if I'm in hell. And is there anybody here who hasn't felt you were in a living hell at some point? You know, the thing about that living hell is it feels like it's triggered by life circumstances. It feels like it's triggered by some particular travesty or challenge. And we all have challenges. And sometimes there are a whole lot more than challenges. We all have pain. And yet, it's how we walk through those challenges that determine whether or not it's a hell or a state of heaven. Remembering or forgetting our oneness. That's what makes the difference, it seems to me. So, the Sufi mystic poet Hafiz says, "You carry all the ingredients to turn your life into a nightmare. Don't mix them." And then he goes on and he ends the poem by saying, "You carry all the ingredients to turn your existence into joy. Mix them, he says." So, how do we choose heaven? How do you choose heaven in this moment? With an intention. With the intention to just turn within and remember that right here and right now, God is. Right here, right now, God is. You have never been closer to God than you are in this moment. You will never be closer to God than you are in this moment, right here. God is. And there is so much love, so much love. This was the message Stephanie kept saying to me over and over about the other side. There's so much love, more love than you can imagine. And even right here, there's so much love. And so we seek to gently lay down the veils which we've placed up that have made us feel separate. One at a time, we peel them away. The beliefs in unworthiness, the beliefs that we are alone. And we allow the pervasive presence of God, which is pure love, to fill this room. In this moment, right here, right now, we choose heaven. We choose heaven. We choose heaven. We choose love. We choose to know the love. We allow it to seep into us from the outside. We allow it to radiate outward from our hearts, so much so that there is no boundary, there is no border. We are love. We are one with love. And this is heaven. Right here, right now. Heaven. Pure love. Pure oneness. In this now moment, we choose heaven. Amen.